Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this weekend edition of the Hebrew Word Study. And as you can see on your screen, we are kind of bouncing back and forth between the um, book of Matthew and the book of Second Samuel. So this week we are in Second Samuel, chapter 6 and verse 7. And so, with that, this is such an interesting verse. I've heard many things preached upon it, taught upon it, but to take it and have this knowledge now where we can, again, go through the Hebrew language and just see if there's any new enhancement of understanding, because this is quite a verse. So, just to recap where we were a couple weeks ago, David has assembled 30,000 people with all these various types of instruments, and they are just having a time. We went through the instruments a few weeks ago and thought there might be something of a clue there as to why this occurrence here, because it all comes down to what happened in this verse, that Uzzah is going to lose his life. And so it's like, what really happened? Why did he die? Um, and what is there more to it than maybe what we've read before? So remember, here's the setting. 30,000 chosen people by David who are playing all these instruments and whooping it up. And the ark is on a cart being pulled by some oxen, and it takes a pathway that we don't understand why it's not on a nice smooth road. It ends up on a threshing floor, and the cart gets jostled. Some versions of the Bible say the oxen stumbled. Um, what I see in the Hebrew is that it just says that the cart shook. So what did it shake from? We really don't know, but it shook. And so here's where we pick up today. And what happened is Uzzah reached out and he grabbed the ark to try to keep it from falling, which would seem like a very noble thing to do. But here's where the passage picks up in verse 7, Vayichar Af. And it says, as translated in English, it says, was aroused the anger of Yahweh. This is very interesting here because anger associated with the word Yahweh, which is the merciful, compassionate side of God, is sort of a strange combination. Okay, you'll see down below here the word Elohim is being used, and the word Elohim is used here. So why is the word Yahweh in here, and what is it? How angry was God? Obviously, it says he was struck there and by God for his error, and he died there. And you'll see some repetition. The word there, or sham in Hebrew, is repeated twice. And what you get to see in the Hebrew is the word order that the translators, when they put it into English, kind of smooth it all out because they want to make it sound good in proper English, and that's the right thing to do in a translation. But looking at the Hebrew, we see some emphasis in the words there, Sham, being used, and we see the word Yahweh and Elohim being used, which stand out so much greater in Hebrew than it does in English. And then, so let's take this step by step. Um, this first sensation or understanding of God being angry, I find that the English just does not do it justice, and that what we understand from the English translation that we read of the Bible is that God's got quite an anger streak, and that he will many times fly off the handle in anger and strike people dead, and reacting in very, very, what almost seems like irrational ways. The beauty of the Hebrew is it softens this emotion quite a bit. And so I know I've talked about it before, but every time I see it, I just want to reiterate it because I feel truly in my heart that God is encouraging this understanding of Him. Because remember, the God of the New Testament is the same as the God of the Old Testament. And for many people, it almost seems like there's a different personality, there's a different almost a different God that exists in the New Testament where we talk about his love and his mercy and his grace and so forth. But yeah, when we get to the Old Testament, we see vengeance and um, punishment being meted out. And many people will say, well, what happened here? And of course, many explanations, and I'm not taking the time to delve into that right now. But what I love about the Hebrew is it supports the idea of God being rational, God being very emotional, God being very much in love with his people, and that this emotion that sometimes that gets translated most of the time in the King James Version as anger is not the same way we interpret anger today in the 21st century. So with that, let's take a look at the word vayichar, and you'll see it's connected together with a little horizontal line called a makef to the next word, which is aleph and a pace of feet, pronounced af, like af. So it's vayichar af. So opening up Vayichar, we see that it uses the word to burn or to be kindled. Of course, with anger is put in by the English translators. The word itself just means to have a burning inside of them. And what is God feeling? What kind of emotion is he feeling that's causing this burning? And what is this word af translated as? Anger, when we open it, it is the word for nostril. Now, of course, it's anger here as English, but the word off really stands for your nose, your nostril. And there's such a fascinating history behind this, and I know I've shared it before, so forgive me if it's repetition for some of you, but it may be new for others of you. This sentence, these words of this emotion that's being explained or expounded here by God was taken from the emotion that the people saw exhibited by a camel when it was overloaded, when it was um, given a task that was too much for it to do. And what happens with a camel, its nostrils will flare, it'll stand still, it'll snort, it'll stomp its paw, and it will show a frustration because it is being forced to do something it doesn't want to do. It's forced to do something that is beyond its capability, beyond its desire. It's being pushed into an area to where it does not want to go. And when I first understood this meaning behind this combination of words, it really resonated with me as to what was potentially happening with the relationship between God and his people. That he was, first of all, he loved them and he has a zeal for them, he has a passion for them, and this passion was being pushed. This passion was being tested. Could it be these 30,000 people were worshiping him in a way that was frustrating to him, that was not what he wanted? So you got that going on. You got these 30,000 people playing all kinds of musical instruments that were not ordained in the Bible. You have the ark being carried in a way that was not intended, and you have all of this happening. And finally, it reached a point that when Uzzah reached out to try on his own strength to enter into the situation, God just says, this is all adding up to be too much. And where I find this connection and what supports this to me is that it's uses the word Yahweh here, which is normally would talk about the merciful, compassionate side of God. Well, how do you explain this? How does the merciful, compassionate side of God come out when the next verse he's striking him down and he dies? And so it's a little bit of a challenge, but some things that we have to consider here is what frame of mind was Uzzah in? He had been around the Ark of God. Could it have become very commonplace to him? Could it have been that his relationship with God was not as respectful as he would have wanted it to be? again, we're just looking for what caused God to act in such a way here. To help us here with the thought, I want to go to the Hebrew Jewish commentary, and this is taken from a website called Chabad. They are a Jewish religious sect that is more of Orthodox Judaism. They're the guys that wear the black hats and the long black coats, have maybe sometimes they have the curly payas, the long curls on the side, but they're more of a Orthodox type frame of Judaism. And they have a commentator from the Middle Ages whose name is Rashi, who wrote a commentary on the whole Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. And he mentions something here in verse 7 that you'll see down here in this, obviously verse 7 here is the English translation. On the right side are the Hebrew words, but then below here is Rashi's commentary. And he looks at it that Uzzah was doing something that he should have known better not to do. And he uses a word here that for his mistake, he calls it a fortiori. Well, of course, that's a word I never heard of before, but going to Google Translate or Google uh, dictionary here, this is a Italian, or excuse me, a Latin word that means the stronger. Fortification, you kind of see the word "fortiori" on this, but it's used to suggest that an argument is based so strong that you don't even need an answer. So my understanding is this is just something he should have known, that he should have known better than to reach out and touch the ark. And here, Rashi brings out something that I have read about, and again, it's not very clear in the scriptures, but the fact that Rashi would support it makes me feel like my understanding is correct. Rashi is saying that Uzzah should have known that the ark didn't need to be lifted. Then the ark was able to lift itself. And so he highlights that Uzzah should have known that if his understanding of the ark was along the lines of what its history had been and what its intentions would be, the ark didn't need Uzzah to protect it, is basically what he's saying. And that the ark would have elevated by itself, and we see there are numerous indications in the scripture where it says that the ark went on its own, that if you look at the weight of the ark versus the um, engineering construction of it, that the weight of the ark would have been much too heavy for the silver coated wood rods to hold it, that the number of people that were assigned to carry the ark would not have had the strength to hold an ark that was covered with solid gold, filled with some stone tablets, have two cherubims on top that were solid gold. It just would have been too heavy. And so he's saying Uzzah should have known that and should have respected that God could take care of himself, basically, and that the mercies of God would have lifted this ark and prevented it from falling or anything coming against it. So, with that thought in mind, this is what Rashi is saying why this occurred, that um, God struck him. And the word for strike here is somewhat interesting too. It is the word for smite. Now, smite here, this word does not mean he killed him, does not mean he slew him. Could it? Yes. But you look at all the different opportunities of interpretation and a meaning that this word smite could have. Only in some places is the word used as being killed. 120 times it's struck, 36 times it's killed. So obviously Uzzah died, and the blow was enough that it caused him to die. What was interesting here is that the word sham is being used, that it struck him there. And then it's translated as God, but it really has a definite article in front. It should have the word the in front, speaking about God in a way that is a little puzzling, is a little bit of trying to understand what is happening here. Because if I were to read this literally, it would say, and struck him there the God upon the error, um, and he died there in the ark of the God. And so it's very difficult to translate word for word to make it sound good in English, but it makes perfect sense in Hebrew, using these definite articles to point at what's happening here, and that this is the judgment of God coming out, which is what I believe the definite article in front of Elohim talks about. But why did he die? It says it was his error. So let's take a look at this word 7944 for error, and we find out that yes, it is translated error, but it's suspicious. It's suspicious that we may not know the exact understanding, because this is the only time in the whole Bible that this word is used. It's from an uncertain derivation. The translator says, well, perhaps it means error. We really don't know. It could mean irreverence. And so we don't know what that word means. And so we don't really know what caused him to die. But we do know from other indications in the Bible, yes, there were people who died who looked at the ark. Obviously, that didn't happen here because they were looking at it. There were people who died who went inside the ark because they violated it and went inside. There are people who claim, they said the judgment would be death to look upon God or look upon any of his angels. Sometimes they thought they did. Other times there's indication where they didn't die when they were in the presence of God. There's other indications where people died because they entered into God's presence in such a way that it overcame them, not in a horrible way, but in a wonderful way. You will find that um, both Moses and Aaron died in this way. There's also indication that the sons of Aaron, who died when they offered incense, that okay, it's made out to be like they did a horrible thing and they died from their wicked deed, but the Hebrew doesn't paint it quite so definitely. It gives the understanding that they could have died just because they were in the presence of God, and it was so wonderful for them that they did not want to come back out of the presence of God, and that they were overcome by God's presence in a wonderful way. Sound impossible? Yeah, sort of, but probably not. How many of us have been in God's presence and been found it to be such a wonderful occasion and such a wonderful experience that we didn't want to leave, that we didn't want to come back from it. We didn't want to come back and be in a place where we didn't have God's presence. And because it was a different time, different dispensation, if you will, different time when God dealt with people. Could it be possible that Uzzah just entered into the presence of God? Was he there in the right way? Maybe, maybe not. But again, we don't really know what caused him to die. I mean, he obviously died, and but it doesn't say this was a good thing. It doesn't say it was a bad thing. We do find a little bit more about this next week when we come together to see how did David react when Uzzah died. What was his response? And was David maybe a little bit at fault here? And why was he, what emotion did David show over all this? Was it similar to what God had for an emotion, or was it different than from what God had as an emotion? So you have to stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 weeks picking up on this, and I hope you enjoyed this little study. God bless you, and may God just continue to guide you as you study His Word. Bye bye.